Have you ever tossed a plastic bottle in the trash? Maybe while you're rushing down the street or, cleaning up your kitchen and just immediately forgotten about it.
Oh, absolutely. We all do it.
Right. You hear that hollow little thud at the bottom of the bin, and your brain just checks a box. Done. Handled. Away.
It's a profoundly human reaction, out of sight, out of mind. We tend to treat that plastic bin like it's, well, like a magic portal that simply deletes objects from the physical universe.
A magic portal. That is the perfect way to describe it. We just assume the universe handles the rest for us.
Exactly.
But today, we are shattering that illusion. We are jumping into a really compelling new paper by Niccolo Federico, which was actually just published today, May 9, 2026.
It is a fascinating read.
It really is. And the mission for this deep dive is clear. We are not here to preach at you. We are not here to moralize or guilt trip anyone about saving the planet with these grand, heroic gestures.
No, not at all.
Instead, we are unpacking the stark physical reality of what actually happens when we throw things away. And we're looking at the psychological traps that keep our brains from doing the bare minimum to manage that reality.
Because the physical reality of waste colliding with human psychology, that is the core of this entire issue. I mean, our technological ability to create indestructible materials has vastly outpaced our brain's ability to process long-term consequences.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Federico states right up front that the trash bin is not a teleportation device.
Right.
When you drop that bottle, it doesn't vanish into another dimension. It is an object with mass and chemical properties, and it remains on this planet.
What is so refreshing about this research is how it completely shifts the framework of recycling. We've all grown up with recycling pitched to us as this heroic moral duty.
Like a virtue.
Exactly, a virtue. But this new framework strips all that moral baggage away entirely. It reframes recycling as simple damage control.
Just damage control.
Yeah, it's about minimizing unnecessary harm from an action you are already taking anyway, which is throwing an object out of your hands.
It really grounds the entire conversation, doesn't it? I mean, you're already holding the bottle. You're already going to throw it. Putting it in the correct box isn't about saving the world. It is about basic material management.
Exactly. But to understand why that management is necessary, we have to look at the physical destination of that plastic. Because away usually means burned, buried, or dispersed into the environment.
And the numbers in this paper, they paint a very grim picture of that dispersal. Globally, we are producing 400 million tons of plastic every single year.
It's a staggering amount.
It is. But the statistic that is almost hard to process is that only 9% of all plastic ever produced in human history has been recycled.
Only 9%, which leaves a massive looming shadow over our entire global ecosystem.
Because if only 9% has been recycled, that means 91% of the plastic ever made is still out there. Yeah, it's sitting in landfills, it's been incinerated into the atmosphere, or just drifting around in our environment. The scale of the leakage is continuous and industrial. The paper notes that every single day, the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic is dumped into aquatic ecosystems.
Visualizing 2,000 garbage trucks backing up to a riverbank and emptying their load every 24 hours, it completely changes the narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't about someone carelessly leaving a single soda cup on the beach. It is a systemic hemorrhage of engineered materials into biological spaces.
I hear skeptics push back on this all the time, though. People say the recycling system is fundamentally broken.
Oh, sure.
They read an article that half of what they put in the blue bin gets exported to another country or, ends up in a landfill anyway because of contamination. If the system is that flawed and the infrastructure is so leaky, why should anyone even bother sorting their trash in the kitchen?
The research addresses that skepticism directly with a really powerful counter-analogy. The system is undoubtedly imperfect. Mismanagement happens, logistics fail, and not every single item is recovered perfectly.
Right.
But abandoning the effort, because it isn't 100% efficient, is like saying, well, hospitals don't save every single patient.
So we shouldn't treat anyone.
Exactly. We should just close all the hospitals and not treat anyone.
That immediately highlights the flaw in the all-or-nothing thinking. I mean, an imperfect system catching some of the fallout is vastly better than an open floodgate catching none.
And we also have to account for the front-end resource cost. Plastic doesn't just manifest out of thin air. It is manufactured primarily from crude oil and natural gas.
Fossil fuels.
Right. The process of cracking hydrocarbons to make plastic polymers requires heating those raw fossil fuels to massive temperatures. It requires staggering amounts of water, heavy machinery, global transportation networks. In 2019, plastic production alone accounted for 3.4% of global CO2 emissions.
Wow. So it's not just a litter problem. It's a massive, energy-intensive climate problem before the bottle even reaches the grocery store shelf.
Exactly. When you bypass the recycling bin, you aren't just creating a piece of stray trash. You are essentially forcing the global supply chain to extract raw materials from zero all over again to make the next bottle.
You're hitting the restart button.
Yes, you're hitting the restart button on that entire carbon-heavy manufacturing process. Recycling means at least a portion of that existing material stays in the loop, mitigating the need for new fossil fuel extraction and the emissions that come with it.
Okay, so we've established the plastic doesn't disappear, and that creating new plastic is a massive drain on resources. But the way this material interacts with nature once it escapes the system is incredibly insidious.
Insidious is the right word.
It's far worse than just an ugly piece of litter ruining a nice view. How does a single-use container that you hold for, 10 minutes turn into a 500-year biological nightmare?
The danger lies in the chemical structure of the material itself. Plastic doesn't biodegrade the way an apple core or a piece of wood does. Microorganisms in the soil just haven't evolved to break down those synthetic polymer chains.
So it just sits there.
Well, instead of decomposing, the plastic fragments. UV light from the sun and physical friction from wind and waves cause it to become brittle and break down into smaller and smaller pieces over centuries.
It just shatters into microplastics. And the tragic irony highlighted in the research is how wildlife interacts with this stuff.
It's awful.
Animals mistake these fragments for food. Like a sea turtle sees a floating plastic grocery bag, and its brain registers the shape and movement of a jellyfish. Or seabirds see little floating, brightly colored fragments of dottle caps and ingest them thinking they're small fish or crustaceans.
And the mechanism of harm once ingested is particularly brutal. When an animal eats organic food, its body extracts calories and nutrients. When it eats plastic, it gets zero nutrition.
Yes, none at all.
But the material still takes up physical space in the digestive tract. This triggers a false sense of satiation. The animal's stomach stretch receptors fire, signaling to the brain that it is full.
Oh, wow.
So the hunger drive shuts down, but the animal is actually starving. They slowly die of malnutrition with a stomach completely packed full of synthetic polymers.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, well, a bit terrifying. The author brings up two biological concepts to explain how this damage scales up: bioaccumulation and biomagnification.
Yes, these are crucial concepts.
To explain bioaccumulation within a single animal, Federico uses the analogy of a bathtub.
The mechanics of bioaccumulation are perfectly captured by that image.
Yeah, picture a bathtub with the faucet running, but the drain is half clogged. Even if the water is only trickling very slowly, because it can't drain out fast enough, the water level is going to rise.
Inevitable.
Eventually, that tub overflows. That is bioaccumulation. An organism ingests a tiny bit of microplastic today, a little bit tomorrow. The biological system has no mechanism to process, metabolize, or excrete these synthetic chemicals, so they just build up and deposit in the tissues over the lifespan of that single organism.
And when you zoom out from the single organism to the entire ecosystem, you encounter biomagnification. This is the multiplier effect as you move up the food chain. The plastic doesn't just stay in the small animals, it gets inherited by the predators.
So if we walk through the math of that multiplier effect, say you have plankton at the very bottom of the food chain, and each plankton ingests just one microscopic particle of plastic.
Is one.
Right. Then a small fish comes along and eats 1,000 of those plankton over a few weeks. That small fish isn't just getting a meal, it's accumulating 1,000 plastic particles.
Exactly.
Then a larger predator fish eats 50 of those small fish. Suddenly, the dosage skyrockets. That large fish is now carrying a massive, highly concentrated load of plastics and the toxic chemical additives associated with them.
The toxicity increases exponentially the higher you climb, and humans are sitting right at the very apex of that food chain.
The reality of this is visceral. The research makes it painfully clear that these microplastics aren't just some abstract problem floating in an ocean gyre thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
They have infiltrated our own biological systems.
You really have.
They've been detected in our drinking water, in sea salt, in honey, in dairy, and in meat. They have been found circulating in human bloodstreams, lodged deep in lung tissue, and even embedded in the human placenta.
We threw the material away, but away turned out to be our own dinner plates and blood vessels. The environmental loop closed itself.
Now, while plastic is the most famous culprit in this conversation, the paper points out that some of the most ecologically devastating things we do every single day involve items we don't even categorize as pollutants.
True. We are deeply conditioned to view pollution as, glowing green sludge pouring out of an industrial pipe. But mundane, everyday household habits are quietly disastrous for local ecosystems and the climate.
Okay, I do have to question one of the examples Federico highlights here, and that is food waste. I completely understand why a synthetic polymer taking 500 years to break down is a disaster. But food is entirely organic. It's biodegradable.
It is.
If I throw out half a casserole or let a bag of spinach turn into green slime in my crisper drawer, why is that framed as an ecological disaster?
It's just going to compost down eventually, right?
The misunderstanding stems from how we calculate the impact of waste. The primary issue with food waste isn't that the material itself is toxic. The issue is the staggering hidden inefficiency of the resources required to create that food in the first place.
I see.
You aren't just throwing away organic matter, you are throwing away a massive chain of embedded energy and resources.
The hidden supply chain costs.
Consider the life cycle of that single bag of spinach. Growing it required massive amounts of fresh water for irrigation. It required land clearance, soil management, and the application of nitrogen fertilizers, which have their own intense carbon footprint.
That's a lot before it even leaves the farm. And then it required heavy diesel machinery to harvest. It required fuel to transport it in a refrigerated truck across the country, and constant electricity to keep it cold in the supermarket display case and in your home refrigerator.
Wow.
When you toss that spinach in the trash, every single ounce of fuel, water, and electricity used to get it to your kitchen is completely wasted. On top of that, when organic matter goes to a landfill, it is buried under tons of other trash.
Right.
It decomposes anaerobically without oxygen, which releases methane, a greenhouse gas vastly more potent than carbon dioxide. Global food waste alone accounts for 8 to 10% of global emissions.
That is wild to think about. You toss a wilted vegetable thinking it's harmless, but you're actually triggering a massive ghost emission of methane while wasting the diesel from the truck and the water from the farm. It is the ultimate inefficiency.
It really is.
There's another hidden household hazard the research mentions. Use cooking oil. You fry some food, you have oil left in the pan, and pouring it down the sink just feels like the most natural cleanup method. I mean, it's a liquid, it washes down the drain. Why is that so damaging?
The physical and chemical properties of oil make it a nightmare for water systems. When you pour cooking oil down the drain, it doesn't just dilute and blend into the water. Oil is hydrophobic. It repels water.
So it separates and rises to the top.
Exactly. It forms a thin, impenetrable film on the surface of rivers, lakes, or even in the municipal sewer system. That film acts like a physical lid.
A lid.
Yeah, it blocks gas exchange at the surface of the water, meaning oxygen from the air can no longer dissolve into the water below. It literally suffocates the aquatic environment.
Oh, that's terrible.
The biological oxygen demand spikes, essential microorganisms die off, and larger aquatic life cannot survive. And before it even reaches a natural water body, that oil solidifies in the cold underground pipes, combining with other waste to create massive blockages that severely damage municipal water purification systems.
That's a fatbergs.
Yes. It is an entirely avoidable daily hazard created simply because the sink drain is conveniently close.
So what does this all mean? If the stakes are genuinely this high, if we literally have microplastics circulating in our bloodstreams and our cooking oil is suffocating the oxygen out of our rivers, why is it so incredibly hard for human beings to just pour the oil in a jar or put the plastic bottle in the correct bin?
Because we are constantly fighting our own evolutionary wiring. The psychology of inaction is a major focus here. Our brains evolved on the savannah. We are fundamentally designed to respond to immediate visible threats and to seek immediate, tangible rewards.
Like if a predator is running at me, the threat is immediate, the cost of not acting is death, and the reward for running is survival. My brain computes that math instantly.
Recycling or carefully managing household waste offers absolutely zero immediate, tangible reward to your primitive brain.
None at all.
The cost of the action, taking the extra 20 seconds to rinse a jar, find a funnel for the oil, and walk to the correct bin, is immediate. You experience that tiny bit of friction right now, But the benefit of that action is distant, it is invisible, and it is impersonal.
Distant, invisible, and impersonal. That is the exact formula for a problem the human brain will ignore. I don't get a dopamine hit for recycling. There's no immediate payoff. It just feels like an administrative chore.
This leads directly into a cognitive trap Federico calls diluted responsibility. It's an error in how our brains process scale.
It's the thought process of looking at industrial pollution, looking at giant factories pumping out smog, and looking in your one single yogurt container and thinking, well, my individual action is a drop in the ocean. It physically cannot change the outcome.
It sounds highly logical on the surface, but it's a profound logical fallacy. The trap is believing that because a single gesture doesn't solve the entire massive problem instantly, the gesture itself is mathematically worthless.
Right.
But environmental damage wasn't caused by one single cataclysmic event. It is the direct result of billions of tiny, daily, seemingly insignificant actions aggregating over decades. Therefore, no collective global problem can be solved without the sum of individual behaviors.
We filled the bathtub one drop at a time over a century, so the only physical way to address it is to manage those drops. But the author brings up another psychological barrier that I think is incredibly perceptive. It's the problem of moralizing.
The framing of the environmental message has historically been its own worst enemy.
When recycling or waste management is framed as a strict moral virtue, when the messaging implies you must do this to be a good person or to save Mother Earth, it frequently backfires. The moment people feel like they are being preached to or judged for their daily habits, they put their defensive walls up.
Because the conversation stops being about rational, practical material management and becomes a direct attack on their identity.
Exactly.
If the implication is that throwing a bottle in the trash makes someone a morally bad person, cognitive dissonance kicks in. To protect their ego, people will subconsciously find ways to justify their inaction, or they will dismiss the entire environmental movement as overly sensitive or alarmist.
The argument here is that we need to strip the morality out of the equation entirely. Drop the preaching. Stop treating the recycling bin like an altar. It should simply be viewed as practical logic. It's the cheapest, most efficient way to stop making an already bad physical situation worse.
It is the minimum reasonable effort required for maintenance. You don't have to consider yourself an environmental superhero to put paper in the paper bin. You just have to be a functional participant in a society trying to manage its physical footprint.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of this deep dive. As you navigate your kitchen today or walk down the street holding an empty container, remember that recycling isn't about saving the world in some dramatic cinematic swoop.
No.
It is simply about recognizing that our actions have a physical reality that outlasts us. The author points out that this year alone, the average person in Europe will generate 36 kilograms of plastic packaging waste. Moving those 36 kilograms to the correct bin is literally the cheapest, easiest way to avoid paying a massive ecological tax later.
The cost of that material doesn't disappear. It just moves down the timeline. You either manage it cheaply and efficiently right now with a recycling infrastructure, or society pays for it later with degraded agricultural landscapes, massive municipal cleanup taxes, and the health costs of microplastics infiltrating the food chain.
Before we wrap up, there's a final thought to mull over. We've talked extensively about how our human brains are fundamentally wired to ignore slow, invisible, cumulative damage. So how do we hack our own psychology to make the invisible visible?
We have to imagine bridging that psychological gap, perhaps through technology or sheer mental discipline. What if, instead of a simple plastic lid, our public trash cans had a digital display?
I love this idea.
Right. And every time you hovered a piece of single-use plastic over the generic landfill bin, that screen ran a calculation and projected the exact coordinates of where that specific item would be in 500 years.
That forces the brain to see the timeline.
Imagine holding a water bottle and seeing a projection that reads, this item will spend the year 2350 breaking down in the digestive tract of a seabird in the Pacific.
Wow.
Or this material will become microplastic sediment in a coastal aquifer in the year 2400.
That instantly cures the out-of-sight, out-of-mind illusion. The magic portal is suddenly just a mirror showing us exactly the chain reaction we are initiating.
Until we have that kind of augmented reality to force our primitive brains to see the distant future, we have to rely on our own cognitive awareness. We have to manually make the invisible visible in our minds every time we throw something out.
So the next time you hold a piece of plastic and you're walking past a bin and you hear that little voice in your head say, well, it's just one bottle, it doesn't matter. Pause for a second. Ask yourself, are you holding a 10-minute convenience or are you holding a 500-year legacy?
It really boils down to acknowledging the physical reality of the objects in our hands.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you carry this new perspective into your daily routine. Because every time you toss something away, remember, there is no away.